I want to take you back to our top story now. The federal government is putting up close to $100 million to help house refugees and asylum seekers right here in Toronto. But the mayor says while it's appreciated, it's short of what's needed. For his reaction, we're joined by Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Minister Sean Fraser. Minister Fraser, new Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow says this is a crisis, that refugees deserve much more support and shouldn't be forced to live out on the street. Do you agree? Are you going to call this a crisis?
Look, anytime you're dealing with a person who's living on the street, that person is living in a crisis situation. One of the things that's important to understand, though, is in addition to the $97 million that we're putting on the table for the City of Toronto and the $212 million we're advancing to solve this interim housing challenge, people who actually have refugee status, who came through government programs, receive additional supports, including income supports to themselves and their families, and including supports to organizations that serve them. The support that we're putting on the table today is meant to address the interim housing challenges and shelter capacity for those asylum seekers, people who didn't come through a Government of Canada program, but nevertheless find themselves here in search of safe haven, who are often fleeing violence, war, and persecution. We want Canada to maintain its role as a leader when it comes to the resettlement of refugees. In fact, we resettled more in each of the last 4 years than any other country in the world. But we're also taking this exceptional measure to make sure those who came here on their own, not through a program, receive support. We're going to continue to work closely with the City of Toronto and other communities across Canada to make sure that vulnerable people have a roof over their head.
As you said, many of them are coming here to Canada and Toronto specifically that we're talking about, looking for a better life. And you're saying in this situation is a crisis situation. But why not say that it is a crisis that they are getting enough support from the government?
Well, one of the things that you have to appreciate is that we have programs in place to support specifically the people who are chosen to come through official Government of Canada programs. The way that we should address the situation around housing for asylum seekers, people who don't come through an official program, is to work with communities to expand shelter and housing capacity more broadly. Going forward, the path to solve this challenge should not rest solely with one level of government, but all three levels of government, who I would argue have some responsibility to take care of vulnerable people who came not as a result of decision of any one level of government, but because they needed to, because they were fleeing vulnerable circumstances. To see the federal government step up with $97 million for the City of Toronto, which should more than accommodate the asylum seekers who are currently putting pressure on the shelter system in the city, is important. But we want to see the city and the province also do their part. We're going to continue to be a partner at the table. Today, I think we've demonstrated that with a sign of good faith, in addition to the continued support that refugees will receive who come through government programs.
In response to this, Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow put out a statement. She says she appreciates that the levels of government are working together and that there is an open line of communication, but she goes on to say it will not meet the needs, the funding commitment. It'll not meet the needs of refugees arriving in Toronto and across the region. What's your reaction to what she's saying this afternoon?
Well, there are two key points that I'd like to make. I think the first is that the city has very recently, just in the last few months, indicated that their needs for this specific issue was $97 million. That is exactly the amount that we are putting forward to match the demands that the shelter system is in fact facing in Toronto. The second piece, which I think may sound like semantics to people who are watching this, and nobody has time for semantics when there's people on the sidewalk, is that the City of Toronto is conflating the support that we provide for refugees with this new support we're advancing to support asylum seekers. So it's false to suggest that we are only coming to the table with today's announcement to support refugees and asylum seekers, because of course, as I expect the mayor knows very well, we have many millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in support for refugees who come through official Government of Canada programs. This is over and above the support that we already provide to those families and the organizations to support them, to recognize there is an exceptional situation with an influx of asylum seekers who don't benefit from that support. And we want to make sure the federal government is there to support them, whether they came through an official program or not, and then work with the municipality and with the provincial government on a permanent basis to address the shortage of shelter capacity and housing needs more broadly. That is a better governance model rather than just responding to emergencies. We should envision the fact that with global migration patterns trending in the direction of more people becoming displaced, this is a problem we should expect to continue to see in Canada, and we should not deal with it on one-off emergency measures. We should build it into the broader housing conversation that we have with communities every year.
So in terms of the specific funding, regardless of the specific funding and which level level of government is giving how much, or if anyone is conflating numbers. Why did it have to come to this, where for weeks outside the shelter in Toronto, people have been living on the streets, and some have been saying that they don't feel welcome here? And as you said, we're expecting to see more and more of this from across the world, people coming to Canada looking for better opportunity. But why did it have to come to this, and what is the long-term solution between all levels of government?
Look, if you're asking for why the city took decisions to exclude asylum seekers from the shelter system, I would point you to the mayor's office and to the city. The reality is we dealt with a substantially identical challenge last year. We worked closely with the city at that time, and we came up with funding that allowed them to continue to provide support to asylum seekers and potentially to refugees who may have come through the system at the time. This year, for reasons that I'll leave for the mayor to explain, the city took a decision not to extend that shelter capacity to people who are in need of housing. My view is that Canada is a compassionate country. We need to remain compassionate, and we need to recognize that an awful lot of the people who come here come to contribute. They have so much more than the contents of their suitcase. They have talents, they have skills. We're now working to issue work permits to them in less than a week so they can actually join the workforce and not just support themselves, but support the community that they're seeking to call home. We're going to continue to be there for vulnerable populations who find themselves in need of Canada's protection, and we're going to work with willing partners at municipal and provincial levels. I sincerely wish that we could have found a solution that allowed the city to continue to provide shelter capacity, but they took a different decision, and we're going to continue to work with them so we don't find ourselves in this kind of a situation going forward.
Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Minister Sean Fraser. Minister Fraser, thanks so much for your time this afternoon.
Pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.